Yeah, great.
All right. Happy December 23rd, 2025. Coming into the end of the year here and the end of this Carroll Mechanisms research project. Thank you for everyone who has supported us along the way and participated in helping to create Carroll Mechanisms into what it is today. Philip and I have spent since August working together on the mechanism set to define Carroll mechanisms. And as context, I'll just set the stage of kind of what our vision is for Carroll mechanisms and what our goal was for the research project. And then we'll talk about, Philip will talk about what we did and what we discovered. So our goal with Carroll mechanisms is to build a tool for collaborative reasoning, so that large groups of people can make decisions together in an asynchronous way. Carroll mechanisms are one way that we like to talk about this is that Carroll mechanisms are a governance mechanism that gives additional influence to people who are good at changing their mind. And this is something that we're quite excited about philosophically, because we seem to live in a world where it's actually the people who are who hold tightly to their radical beliefs that end up with the most political power. And our ambition with Carroll mechanisms is to design systems where nuance is what flourishes, where neutrality is what flourishes, where intellectual honesty is what flourishes, where integrity is what flourishes. So this is our ambition, our mission, and our goal. We've been working on this actually for many years now. Philip and I first met, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, when I began to talk to him about this crazy idea. And even before this, I was working on it for several years. And we're very fortunate that we get to live in the era of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations that have a demand for, a need for tools for collective decision making, like what we have, like what we are working on developing. And so this has been our goal. You know, our approach has been to design a graph meaning a kind of a network of arguments that relate to one another. And that the idea is that if you have this global graph over the whole world of all the arguments that people are making, and if you make it so that those arguments actually shift the decisions that are being made on a global scale, then all of a sudden you have the forum for people to participate in collective decision making, in shaping what our world collectively looks like. And this is exciting because as people are participating in this graph, they're updating the global view of not only what is important, but what would be important questions to answer. And so this has been our goal. And one key kind of heterodox choice that we made in this unconventional choice is we said, well, we want to design this governance system to assume that there is going to be money that's participating in it. That's money that's shifting the decision making. And that's different from what many people do when they work on governance. Oftentimes when people work on governance, they try and design systems that are not influenced by money, right? They consider the influence of money to be a bad thing. And what we did here is we said, well, yes, of course, we'd love to live in an idealized world where money doesn't have influence, but we like to treat money like rocket scientists treat gravity. It's just a law that we have to respect. And so we sought to design a governance mechanism that permits money to be influential, and that nonetheless, despite being influential, it's not the most wealthy players who have the most influence, and that we still consider both the evidence and a plurality of perspectives in the final conclusion, so that even the poor person can beat the billionaire if they have the key insights, the most internally consistent view the best track record of prediction. So this was our goal, and the method by which we sought to achieve it was through these mechanisms called, well, we call them Carroll markets, and more broadly, the mechanisms that we call Carroll mechanisms. And the history of the fundamental design of a Carroll market is based off of prediction markets. So right now, prediction markets are this very popular way for groups of people to bet on what is going to happen in the future. And of course, when people put their money where their mouth is, you get a different kind of information about what they actually believe is going to happen. And so prediction markets have proven to be more accurate than polling for figuring out who's going to, for example, win the election. So they seem to be really powerful and reliable tools for good epistemics, for good collective sense making. And they've also proven, the good news is they've proven to be really sustainable businesses, because as people trade, you can take a little bit of the trading, and that's great news, right? Because it's important that we fund our global collective sense-making infrastructure, and it seems to give us a way to do it. And so, for those reasons and many more, this is what Carroll markets are based off of. Is they're based off of a type of prediction market called an LMSR, log market scoring rule, that allows you to trade on your belief about a particular event. So that's kind of a little bit of the history of the project that brought us here, and our specific goals with this project was to implement was to find our path to an implementation of these things that we call Carroll mechanisms. Now, maybe it's worth giving a little bit of context on what a Carroll mechanism is and why we.
Uh-oh.
He will come back.
Yeah, so we're still connected. Okay, he said it was him that was frozen. I was on a call with him yesterday, and it got the connection seemed to be kind of poor at some points, but he always came back. Give him a minute. Yeah.
So where are you based? That you have coyotes? I've
Right.
never heard of them.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in Colorado, in the USA. Coyotes are most places in North America, but we do have quite a few here. Our cities are very sparse, so they've become quite an urban animal, almost like a big squirrel or something like that. They eat trash and pets, and they do quite well.
Are they like really small or like?
No, they're smaller than a wolf. They're like a medium-sized dog. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. They're not particularly dangerous to humans. I think it could happen that a pack might attack a child, but I've never heard of it before. So they don't make me nervous for myself or even my kids, but certainly small animals are in grave danger.
Didn't expect that, but interesting.
Welcome back, Connor.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. My internet dropped. So,
All right.
at what point did I lose you?
sounded like you said you were going to go and start grounding it, and so I wonder if you were going to bring up a demo or pitch it to
Yes.
me. I wasn't sure what was coming.
I was gonna, well, best is probably if I pitch it to you now.
So for me, I don't want to go into a huge amount of technical detail because it's just easy to get lost in the weeds. But the original, I mean, Connor set this up well, where he said we want to use some kind of prediction market like mechanism for this. And so the first step in the project was to figure out whether it's possible to turn prediction markets, which are traditionally people, essentially betting on an event either happening or not happening. And can we take that primitive and extend it to kind of a setting where there's lots of possible events and lots of linkages between events, and give people, use prediction markets to give people the ability to essentially bet on how they believe different kinds of events are connected, and express certain concepts about how they're reasoning about decisions and things like that. And this felt like a big expansion from a single issue prediction market to now this kind of multi-issue networked prediction market. And it turns out that with some additional work, we were able to find some kind of actually a bit older work on prediction markets from about 15 years ago, older academic work, and use kind of the existing prediction market LMSR tools to directly do what we wanted to do. So what Connor's showing you now is is this big network where every single box is a statement of some kind of fact or not fact, and every single link is also has this kind of notion of a statement of some kind, that of a connection, a logical connection between the things that are linked. And every single object on this network is operating as a prediction market. And then the beautiful thing is that purchasing shares in one market, or kind of making bets in one market, will affect the kind of the implied probabilities of the events that market is connected to. And so the kind of the technical underlying tools that we're using here is something called a combinatorial LMSR, which is and we're using it in a particular way to be able to kind of build this network structure. So a big part of the project early on was just kind of working and doing the research to find this underlying kind of formalism, and then doing the research to actually instantiate it and make it work as a network like what you're seeing here.
So
Yeah, go for it.
The key idea here is that this is a discussion that was run yesterday of an organization that was trying to answer the question of what will happen as a result of our operations committee in terms of the operation efficiency of the DAO. And there's a bunch of different possibilities that people have added here. These are called options. For each one, there's an associated market. And actually, I'm not going to be able to show you the market here because for reasons we'll discuss in a second. Typically, when people use this, they're not using this market version that I'm showing you because we have technical limitations. But in principle, if you have infinite compute and infinite time, then you can have a market associated with every single one of these points. People can buy shares in that. When they buy shares, that increases the probability of the point. And if they say buy shares in the edge that connects the points, these 2 points, then that will cause both points to go down in value. And if this one were to go up, it would cause this one to go down, right? So if I was to add over here, like I use a dated example. Let's use Europe. Where should we go for vacation? We want to go to Europe, or we want to go to the US. if we connect these two with a negating argument, then what that means is that when the price of this is high, when the connection is high, then when Europe goes up, it means that the USA goes down. And so it's kind of capturing this idea that these two are in conflict with one another. We can't go to both at the same time. We don't have the budget or we don't have the time, right? And maybe the final thing worth mentioning is that there's this final affordances. This is what ends up giving it the name Carroll mechanisms, named after Lewis Carroll, which is a mitigation. And we can say we have enough budget, enough money and time to go to both this Europe and the States, right? And if you do that, then you can connect, actually you can connect this point up to the edge. And as this goes up in value and this goes up in value, this one is going to go down, which means these two are no longer going to be tied to one another, right? So that's the key idea of the negation game, and you can see how people are using it here. You know, they say, here's a supporting argument. Someone is saying, correct committee is a fair committee, fair and smart task allocation among DAO participants. This is a supporting argument to increase revenues through correct decisions made by correctly chosen members of for the committee. And this person is saying, look, I think that this is true. They're not going to disagree that a correct committee is a fair committee, but they don't think that the role of ops is to increase revenue, right? So they think that there's a different role operations are supposed to have. So this is what we call a mitigation. As at the end, you can see that there's this graph of all these various different points, and they're tied to one another, and they have probabilities associated with them as a result of the buy and sell actions that have been performed by various participants. So this is an implementation of Carroll mechanisms inside of this product called, our product is called the negation game. And this really is the result of our research this time together. So these combinatorial LMSRs that we discovered, they're what allow us to implement this here. And also the challenge that we face with combinatorial LMSRs is actually in the name. It is combinatorial. Combinatorial means that what matters is all of the different combinations of all of the different prices. In order to compute how the prices should update, you have to look at all of them together. And it turns out that that process of looking at them is it's an exponential blow up in terms of compute time. And so the reason that this graph is not able to render right now is because it's still processing, or probably it's quit. It's failed. The processing has failed, and it said, okay, it's just taking too long. So this is the first challenge that we run into in our research. Is we've run into a computational problem, and maybe Philip, you can talk about that and talk about how you think we can address it. You're muted still.
There it is. Thanks. This is potentially a bad problem to have. You know, if the fundamental underlying thing you're using has bad computational scaling, then maybe you're in trouble. However, if you look at this network that Connor has on the screen, you'll see that it is quite a sparse network. In fact, I think it's a tree. In the sense that there are almost no, maybe there are no cycles. There's no places where the links kind of like create a circuit of some kind. And so what that means is that if you look at that like lobe on the right, maybe you can circle that lobe with the orange node on it on the right there, Connor. That lobe is almost completely independent from the rest of the network. Yeah. It's only connected through that one path to the rest of the network. And so what that means is that the if I make a purchase, or if I change the probabilities on a node in that right lobe, it does change the probabilities everywhere else, but in a very controlled way, only through that one link that goes through that kind of hub node at the center. And so what that means is that we can segment. So we can take the lobe on the right and segment it off and implement it as its own combinatorial LMSR, and then implement the other lobes of the network as their own. Take care, Marlene. And then we've discovered a way essentially to connect them without having to kind of consider all possibilities of all nodes. Instead, we would consider all possibilities of all nodes in each little segment, and then use a pricing trick to connect them with other nodes. So we're confident this works on tree networks like you see right here, and then there's an open question about how well it works on networks that have cycles in it, but we have some nice leads there. And I'm pretty optimistic that by exploiting the kind of the network structure of this, we can completely get past the combinatorial blowup, especially on sparse networks like this.
So if we can address that, then we have this graph of all of these different prediction markets. We also have the ability for people to dispute the relevance between the different prediction markets. But you might notice that there's a shortcoming to this. And the shortcoming is that, okay, you can make these nodes, you can connect them, but how do you actually say which one should be in connection with one another? And that's the second half of the research that we did, was trying to answer this question. Basically, how do we connect these nodes together in a meaningful way? And maybe you can talk about that. Hello.
Sure. So here you want to talk about the programmable aspects. Is this the
programmable and self-resolving prediction markets?
Yeah, sure.
And
sure.
then I'll talk about epistemic leverage and what did and didn't work.
Sure. Sounds good. So let me talk about programmable first. So the other big difference between the way we're thinking about this and the way people have thought about prediction markets in the past is that the old way of thinking about prediction markets, or let's call it the classical way of thinking about prediction markets, is that a centralized entity sits down and says, all right, what do we want to know? Now let's instantiate a prediction market for that thing that we want to know. And even if they had access to this tool, you would still imagine them sitting down and drawing out the entire network themselves, and then releasing the fixed network into the world. We would really like to be able to have users kind of dynamically update the network, and so we've discovered ways of doing that, and it turns out it's actually fairly simple. There's a kind of a very natural, kind of mathematically correct way of charging users a fee to add a new point. And so you can't necessarily add new points for free, but you have to pay some kind of like seed money or something to add a point. But you can just add a point anywhere in the network and connect it to anything that you want in the network. And there's no kind of like mathematical rules of LMSR that we're breaking by allowing people to do that. There's a couple questions about exactly what's the right way to kind of initialize each point, but the basic idea is quite straightforward, and we've got that worked out. So the other piece is classical prediction markets also require a trusted, let's call it a trusted, or at least an agreed upon resolution source for each point under contention. And so this is, so if I have a point that says, the Green Party wins the next election, and then, the Green Party wins the next election, then anybody who's bought shares in that outcome gets a payout based on having bought shares in that outcome. Here, we're asking people to bet on more ambiguous things. So we're asking them to bet on things like, do we, in Connor's little example, do we have enough money to go to both Europe and the US, and potentially to bet on this proposition that like these two are mutually incompatible. Like we can't go to both Europe and the US. And so because we're asking people to basically place bets on logical connections between points, there's no obvious way to get a resolution source for those points. And so this has led us to think about how do we resolve prediction markets that don't have kind of a hard resolution source associated with them. And it turns out that there's a way to do that as well. And this is a much more recent kind of work from the academic literature on something called self-resolving prediction markets. And so we're very early kind of in the exploration for this. But there's some very clever techniques that some people from Harvard have come up with for doing resolution in prediction markets without having kind of a trusted, yes/no resolution source. And I don't want to say too much more about it just because it's early days yet in our study of whether we can apply it here. But it's quite a cool set of techniques that looks like it could do what we need here. So I don't know if you wanted to say any more about that, Connor, or if that does what you'd like.
This covers it. Then there's a final bit. So when we set out on this journey, we had essentially two big questions to answer. And the first question was, can you even make these markets? Where like there's all these nodes and they're connected to one another. And our answer is yes, you can make these markets. With an asterisk saying you'll have to solve a computational problem so that it's actually you can compute the markets. The second question that we had was, okay, can you then resolve these markets, right? Can you use these in a governance structure where you have a high level statement? That high level statement then has it has people disputing it, and the dispute that people offer, it changes the price, and therefore it changes the likelihood of execution. So this is the second thing, is can we take these markets and now can we hook up these big discussion markets into a final decision tool. And this is within this framework, what we had imagined was that this is actually going to operate within a futarchic framework. So futarchy is a governance mechanism where you agree on the criteria, and then you bet on whether or not after executing an action, you will achieve that criteria. And futarchy is being used by a handful of DAOs now to allocate their grants. By some DAOs, it's their sole governance mechanism that they use. And it has great theoretical support. Of course, it also has some theoretical.
Oh, looks like we lost Connor again. Give him a second and see if he comes back.
Okay, I just lost my.
Oh, there you are. We got you back.
Connection is back. Nice.
So we lost you as you were saying. Futarchy has great theoretical promise, but also, and then
has great theoretical promise and also theoretical risks. One of the, but what we like about it is that by default, it gives influence to money, right? And so we start with this, money has influence, and it also constrains money because it only rewards you if you're right. And then we say, okay, can we now introduce this additional property that we care about, this property where it's the kinds of people that end up having a voice are exactly the ones that we want to have a voice. So for this, we had this idea that it was possible to disproportionately listen in the graph to people who were good at changing their mind, so who are believed by the participants in the mechanism to be likely to change their mind. Because mind changing is correlated with intellectual honesty, it's correlated with neutrality or being unbiased, it's correlated with being an expert. If what characterizes an expert more than anything is you say, hey, should we do this? And they say, well, it depends. There's a great quote, I think by, it might have been Eisenhower, or it might have been Johnson. He said, I want a economist who only has one hand. I want to be advised by a one-handed economist. And people asked him why, and he said, because every time you ask a question to an economist, they say, well, on the one hand, he only wants that. It's like, let that be their only hand. On my only hand, yes, this is the thing we should do. So, this is the kinds of people that you want to empower, to have a voice in collective decision making. And the way that we imagined doing this was through this mechanism we explored called epistemic leverage. And the idea behind epistemic leverage is that so when someone makes a statement about what would change their mind, you can actually see that in this graph here. So if they buy shares in this one, and then they buy shares in this one, you can see that visually we reward that. We say, okay, you've bought shares here and you bought shares here, and that means that if this weren't true, you would change your mind about this. In some way you're dependent on this belief. Meanwhile, over here, this is a good one. Better coordination within DAO procedures. That's something that, let's say, I believe. And then I can also say, but I would change my mind if there would be inefficient budget allocation, right? And so I can like both of them. You can see that turns green. But what that's doing is it's directing our attention as a collective. It's allowing us to say, okay, so lots of people believe that this is a risk, that we could have inefficient budget allocation. And so we should probably go ahead and we should make sure that that's addressed somehow. Of course, the way that you address it in the negation game is you either make a good argument against it. So maybe these are good arguments and they totally mitigate that concern. Or you make an argument saying, I'm sorry, I said mitigate. Maybe these are good arguments and they totally make this concern not true, right? Or you can mitigate it and you can say, okay, that's a true concern, but for some reason it doesn't matter. And that's what you would do with this mitigation here. And so that was our mission, our ambition, is to reward people, give them additional influence. Literally, we wanted to increase the probability in the market as a result of me coming along and saying, I believe this, but this would change my mind. That was our goal. And we ran into a handful of technical problems with that. And so maybe, Philip, you can talk about what those problems were.
Yeah, so I think that it's probably easiest to summarize it by saying that we did not find a way to use, let's say, vanilla prediction market tools to do this, to give people this additional influence by saying what would change their mind, without oh no, just period. We didn't find a way to use vanilla tools to do this. And then if you do anything else, like if you add stuff onto the prediction market primitives, then you lose some of the meaning of the prediction market primitives. And the reasons for this are kind of subtle, but it has to do with the fact that prediction markets are really a very cleanly designed set of tools for turning kind of like trading actions into probabilities in a very self-consistent way. And if you tinker with it, it's very, very easy to break that self-consistency. And so that's one of the issues that we ran into, is that there's no very obvious way that we found yet anyway to use the existing tools directly to give epistemic leverage. And then when you do something else, if you add new tools on, you lose some of the kind of the promises that the prediction market gave you in the first place. That's kind of I think the main challenge that we ran into, or at least the way I see it. The other piece is that one of the things that frequently ended up happening is that when we added a new tool on, it was very, very easy to add a new tool on that not only messed with the prediction market in kind of unpredictable ways, but also gave, let's call them selfish traders, the ability to do a series of trades and just kind of freely extract capital from the market. And so that was something that every instance of this that we created, that there were these interesting exploits that it's not clear how to mitigate them. So that's, in a nutshell, those are the issues that we ran into.
Yeah, and of course you can read the full report for all the details of this. It's extraordinarily detailed, 30 pages. The story that Philip, you did a good job of summarizing it, that the issue seems to be that as soon as you give additional influence, there's all of these ways in which someone can take the fact that you're giving phantom influence and they can use that to directly extract. Either they can, the two main moves that they can make is they can stomp on somebody else's point. So, here I'm focused on this one up here. Let's call this point A. Let's call this one point B. And let's call this middle point R for relevance. If I have point A and I buy point B and that pushes up point A, then that pushes down B. And maybe I really dislike B, but then this additional influence that we give is a vector for someone to spam and attack, potentially, where they push down B, is B's price, kind of for free or for cheap. Similarly, we think there's and that's less of an issue because we think we have ways we can maybe mitigate it through this mechanism we call doubt. But the bigger issue is that there's ways that as a player I could create fake users, so other accounts, and I could come in and with my other account I can buy shares, push up the price. Then I can come in with my main account, I can push up the price even more using this epistemic leverage where I'm given additional influence. And then I can sell on my other account. And what I've done is I've taken money. There's a big pool of funds that are owned by the mechanism, that's owned by the underlying system. And I can just pull money out of it like it's a bank account. Big problem.
Yeah.
There are potentially thresholds that indicate kind of the upper and the lower bound on how much additional influence you can give while still keeping it resistant to these sort of extraction techniques. And an area of research for us is finding what those are. And another potential of if those bounds are too low, another potential approach here is to say to someone, look, it's not if you buy and then you say this would change my mind, but it's actually if you permanently stake and then say that this would change my mind. That's when you get the additional influence. And there's a lot of benefits to staking from a system game theory perspective. There's a lot of benefits to asking people to permanently stake because it really tells you that they're sincere. And the secondary benefit is that, of course, if they permanently stake, well, then they can't sell those shares later. And so there's much less of a concern of capital extraction. And sort of what they're doing is they're saying, I believe in this so much that I want to push its price up, even if it means that I don't get paid out. That's kind of a way to think about it. It means that I'm giving up optionality, right? The way that we imagine, so we didn't get an opportunity to explore that in our time together. And the way that would ultimately give more influence to people who were, sincere and who were capable of changing their mind is that they would make statements about they would permanently stake. They would make statements about what could change their mind, right? They'd buy this middle arrow. They would get that additional influence on the point that they care about. And as we imagine it, someone might come along and say, I don't think you're going to change your mind. And in exchange for that, that pushes down that extra influence they got. And if they do change their mind, then that person who said, I don't think you're going to change your mind, they lose that bet. And then they lose the money that was associated with that bet. And so what that does is it creates the only people you want to doubt are the ones who really you think are not going to change their mind. And if you think about who those people are throughout history, well, like, you know, the Philip Morrises of the world, they don't like to change their mind as a result of new evidence about cigarettes. Whereas a scientist, they're totally neutral. They'll change their mind. They'll go where the evidence goes. You know, energy companies, oil companies, they don't like to change their mind about the risk of climate change because they have a vested interest. Whereas climate scientists, they're more neutral. And of course, like beyond climate scientists, there's probably someone who's even more neutral, right? Because they don't have a career that's wrapped up in this. And it's those people, always in plural systems, it's those people that you want to listen to the most, you know, the people who are in the middle. And if we design systems and contexts and worlds where people who are in the middle have more voice, then we end up with a saner world in general, because being insane will be good for your political prospects, right? For your ability to influence the system. So all of this outrage and hatred, which is causing division and polarization, can be mitigated with by finding those intellectually honest parties who are capable of changing their mind. So that's the mission, but there's actually a discussion in the paper about this. Well, we might not have time for it here, but talking about the details of the conditions under which it might make sense, why some of the additional mechanics might not be necessary, etc. And we had actually a lot of features that we wanted out of Carroll mechanisms, and I think for completeness sake, I'll just go through this brief list of this is where we started our research about 6 months ago. Well, it was 3 months ago. 3 months ago. Yeah, 3/4 months. We had 3 levels of success. We had limited success, strong success, and outstanding success. And those were broken down into a handful of different categories. So without talking, first I'll just go over which ones were successful. You know, this one where we say that there's this arbitrage proofness, we actually got this property. It's great. So this is what Carroll mechanisms gave us. In terms of, we didn't get relevant solicitation. Maybe with self-resolving markets, we start to get part of the way there. But unfortunately, because we didn't get epistemic leverage and we didn't get self-resolving markets, we didn't get to relevant solicitation. Proper scoring, we got this. This basically means people have an incentive to be honest. And with log market scoring rule, we got proper scoring. Degradation to futarchy, we didn't get this. We feel some sense of, let's see, maybe Philip, you can talk about how close we are to degradation to futarchy.
So we didn't specifically pose this in a futarchic, like I didn't study this in a futarchic context, but there's no technical reason why not. Like I basically did it for simplicity's sake, but there's I don't think there's a barrier to having a futarchic decision market sit on top of one of these things that we've created. So it's probably reasonable to say at least limited success here, in the sense that there's no barriers to doing this.
The what futarchy what degradation of futarchy tries to say as a property is it says that this system, when all of the other bells and whistles fall apart, so all of the, you know, like all of the edges and nodes that are trying to dispute the conclusion, when even if they cease working, you still have a futarchy implementation under the hood, and that's really nice because we'd love to fail to something that we think already has good properties. Ambiguity pump, we did not get this. So the idea behind the ambiguity pump property is that players that use epistemic leverage get more influence by restaking positions, and that favors more easily resolvable issues. So we think or thought that maybe there would be disproportionate additional influence given as an emergent property to those points that were more resolvable, right? So like if I say who's going to win the election, that's much more resolvable than something like what's the best ice cream. And so that's what we hope for out of ambiguity pump. But because we weren't able to get epistemic leverage to work, we weren't able to show that whether or not we have this property. Long distance propagation / information cascades. What we hoped was that there was a way in which when you make a point, when you support a point at some point in the graph, that it changes the prices elsewhere in the graph. And we actually have that through the log market scoring rule. As long as these things are connected to one another, buying one thing here will change the price everywhere else that is connected, and it will do so in the right way. It's really remarkable. So we got this property. Very excited about that. Information cascades. Well, this also might include a little more information, a little more of like the property might be a little bigger than it's posed here, which is that we would love that there's that a little bit of research could come in, some evidence at some point in the graph, and that could cause the whole graph to need to update because people were doing a bunch of mind changing, right? And so that there can be a cascade of people doing mind changing. That's incentivized, but we kind of bundled these together and then found that perhaps they're actually separate. And so I'd say that we have long distance propagation. Maybe we don't have what we meant by information cascades. Double crux, we wanted there to be we wanted there to be an incentive for two parties to a disagreement to find the thing that they both agree that they disagree on. Right, they agree to disagree, and we thought that this is something that epistemic leverage would do, because if I say this would change my mind and you say this would change your mind, and they're in a little rectangle, a little square, then that is a double crux. But once again, because we didn't get epistemic leverage working, we didn't get the opportunity to evaluate this property. Intellectual honesty incentive. We wanted there to be a pervasive incentive for players to be known as intellectually honest. It doesn't necessarily mean that they even are, right? But they want to be seen that way. We don't live in a world right now where being seen as intellectually honest is actually all that important. If you're a strong man, right, you don't need to be intellectually honest to be powerful. And we want to create a context where that is the case, where integrity reigns supreme. So this is the question. Is it possible to do this? Once again, we didn't get epistemic leverage, so we didn't get to answer this question. These last ones, these were in the category just of information bounties, or just of outstanding success. So the highest level of success we hoped for. We didn't get information bounties. They were also dependent on epistemic leverage. What we thought would happen is that someone would say, I would change my mind if new information would come in, and then they would change their mind, and that person who provided the new information would get rewarded for doing so, giving an incentive for research and journalism. But we didn't get epistemic leverage, so we didn't get that. And finally, identity edges. Points can be connected to one another by an identity edge. And actually, we did get this. We are able to implement identity edges because it's possible to just define that as a logical relationship between 2 points, and anything that can be defined as a logical relationship you can represent in programmable markets, and so it's very exciting. and therefore in Carroll markets, because Carroll markets are just an implementation of programmable markets.
Mhm.
So so that means we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's call it 4.5 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 out of 10 properties we were hoping for, which, as far as research agendas go, is pretty good. We set a really ambitious research agenda, and we know so much more about the space now. If you'd like to review this research agenda, you can do so. In fact, final results, final write-up. I'll just add this here at the top, and I will, I think I've downloaded your document, Philip, and I'll just add that here, NGI Carroll. Oh, it seems like I can't find it. Application game.
I can upload that to archive as well. Maybe a smart thing to do.
Yes, that's a great idea. Interesting. I don't know. I think I have it.
Okay.
Here, I'll just download it, and I will upload it to this document. So you can access this document at bit.ly /Carroll brief. So this will be available online. And before we finish this call, I will upload the final document, or a link to the final document for everyone to view. Thank you to Scroll for their fiscal support of this research. It was incredibly valuable, and I think my intention is to continue down this line of thinking, and so I think in the long term it will be a really valuable investment. And then also thank you to the community, to all those people who have attended to give feedback on the negation game as we've developed it. You've been so generous, and you've really helped us to refine the product from what it was just a year ago, to the point that we're now, we really have a very beautiful product that people are beginning to use to make decisions, even though it doesn't have the mechanisms yet. So that has been a huge success. And then finally, and most importantly, thank you to you, Philip, for joining on this adventure, for lending your incredible talents of communication and planning and research and writing and mathematics, and the list goes on and on and on, on your sabbatical to work on this together with me. This is the dream of my lifetime, to get to work with you and to get to work on this. And so the last 4 months, I've just been a kid in a candy shop, getting to finally begin to answer some of these questions and really precisely define what it is that we mean. And this final document that we've produced, I'll just pull it up here, is it's quite detailed. And it gives us such a solid foundation for the next phase of research, where we want to talk about, the shortcomings that we had, and things that haven't been tried yet that we can try, and constraints that we've discovered, and so on. So it's such a valuable outcome. Okay.
I'll just say
With
it's been a joy working on it, and it's been fabulously interesting, and I've enjoyed all of it. So thanks for involving me.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. Anything else you want to say, my friend, before we call this a wrap?
I don't think so.
All right, well, then that is the end of the Carroll Mechanisms research for 2025. Congratulations to everyone. Thank you for your support. And we'll see you renewed in 2026 as we take this to whatever is the next stage.
Perfect.
All right. Stopping recording.